You know, when you cast your vote inviting a person to represent your interests, the standards of conduct for that now elected official are instantly raised. What they do, who they associate with, are now a direct reflection of their ability to lead. For District 6 Alderman Tony Thomas, the accusations of misconduct have dogged him through most of his tenure on City Council. Now, just 2 months into his 4th term, those accusations and the accusers are surfacing once again in greater numbers than ever before. If there was ever a time for the alderman to step forward and address these allegations, it's now. But I want to warn you, the results of my 3-month investigation are about to reveal things that are inappropriate for younger ears.
1, 2, 4, 3.
By most standards, 6th District Alderman Tony Thomas has been a very good representative to the voters who have kept him in office since 1999. He can claim some credit for the completion of the Coffee Bluff Marina, a full-service skate park in his South Side district, and a number of other smaller projects constituents urge the alderman to support. But he must also take ownership for these hundreds of photographs and videos, many that he has posted to his own Facebook page over the years, perpetuating the image of a politician known for bar hopping, heavy drinking, and the companionship of dozens of teen boys, many not old enough to drive. For more than a decade and a half, he has shown up at local bars and restaurants surrounded by these young men, again posting the pictures to prove it. Thomas has documented for the world to see more than a dozen out-of-town trips, many on official city business, with some of these teens. Taxpayer-financed conferences where other aldermen tell us he shared hotel rooms with these boys and young men.
Everybody was looking around saying, what's he bringing this kid with him for? And, you know, it was at the end of the conference, the majority of people on City Council went to Michael Brown and said, look, tell him, you know, he can't bring young boys to these functions with him anymore.
Former Alderman Ellis Cook is recalling a League of Cities meeting Thomas attended in December of 2003. While every other alderman flew to Nashville, Thomas drove his own vehicle accompanied by this man, Josh Flowers, just 18 at the time. Flowers says the alderman hired him to help with his first campaign for re-election. During that Nashville trip and any other time the two were together, Flowers says he never had to ask for a refill when it came to alcohol.
There was a lot of drugs involved too, as far as Tony goes. There was a lot of cocaine.
Tony providing that cocaine?
Yes.
Flowers says despite Thomas's advances during that conference, nothing sexual happened. But on 2 separate occasions back in Savannah, each after a night of heavy drinking and cocaine use, Flowers says Thomas didn't ask.
There's 2 separate times where I woke up to him performing sex on me. And the first time I thought I made it very clear, you know, I'm not homosexual. This is not, you know, my cup of tea, so to speak. But the second time it became very clear that he was shooting for something more so.
Flowers says he thought his relationship with Thomas was as simple as employee-employer, but the paychecks that he was getting for the first few months were replaced with something he wanted more.
Eventually, it ended up going from being paid in cash, working for him, to being paid with drugs and alcohol, which was my vice at the time. And hindsight being what it is, I realized that was his way of getting a hold of me.
Yeah. In the meantime, Thomas continued to represent the city at events and conferences throughout the country, often with a young man or 2 at his side. These photos are from a League of Cities trip to Washington, D.C. in March of 2007. The young man here also accompanied Thomas to San Antonio, Texas for another League of Cities trip, this one in November of 2009, and again to the Florida Keys in 2010. After hearing these allegations, not only from Josh Flowers, but from no fewer than 3 other alleged victims, I wanted to make sure that I got Tony Thomas's response. The alderman has refused to talk to me about other issues in the past. However, this time he seemed eager, and I caught up with him at the last city council meeting.
They're accusing you of child sexual assault. They're accusing you of providing alcohol to a minor.
Yes.
They're accusing you of providing cocaine during
Yes.
party situations. Give me a response, because this is pretty serious stuff.
Well, you got to have evidence.
Yeah.
In today's world, you have to have evidence. So
Yeah.
I would suggest that they go and get that evidence.
But you're denying that there was any of this that ever took place.
Absolutely.
One organization that isn't buying it is also one that supported the alderman's political career for years. Georgia Equality is the state's largest gay rights organization. Kevin Clark, its former senior board member. For the reputation of Georgia Equality, he says, they not only pulled that support this last election, they want justice for Savannah.
Truth has a way of always, ultimately winning. Sometimes it takes many years, sometimes decades. But the truth finds a way to bubble up, and I will do whatever I need to do to make sure that Tony Thomas is arrested, prosecuted, and thrown in jail.
And Clark says he wants that for people like Chris Hope.
I met Tony when I was 14 years old. I was in 8th grade at Savannah Country Day School.
Chris Hope says he too needed a summer job when Thomas struck up a conversation with him at a local movie theater.
Took me to the mall. He bought me a pair of shoes, and we were in traffic, and he just said, why don't you need to give your daddy some sugar. And I was like, I'm sorry.
Hope says he could have never imagined a simple peck on the cheek then would lead to what happened a few weeks later, when he says the alderman invited him to clean up at his house after a day of filthy yard work.
Took my shower, drying off, went in, would get my clothes, put my clothes back on, and then I was forced to the bed, and he forced himself on me and started performing sex on me.
He says months and months of sexual payback followed. Hope never knew when, where, or how Thomas would demand that so-called sugar from the then 15 and 16-year-old. Moving on from that experience has not been easy.
It's ruined every relationship I've had. It drives you nuts.
What drives you nuts, Chris? Is it the fact that you participated despite the fact you were emotionally unprepared to reject it?
Well, at that time, you don't know how to handle it, but then every day, you're shamed, all right? You don't want to tell anybody. If you do tell somebody, they'll probably kill them.
Right.
Once again, for years, you could find dozens of pictures of Hope and other teens splattered across the alderman's Facebook page. Hope is the one behind the camera when this video was shot of what he says was an inebriated alderman, once again surrounded by several young men. But behind the scenes, his alleged victims, targets of pleasure, will tell you they were suffering then and still suffer to this day.
It'll mess you up. It'll mess you up, man.
Do you fear at all repercussions legally from Alderman Thomas for making these kinds of statements about him?
Bring it on.
Every victim, every former city official and employee, every source I spoke to for this investigation said exactly the same thing when I asked if they feared retaliation from Alderman Thomas for finally speaking out. And that reaction was, bring it on. Through multiple sources close to the Chatham County District Attorney's Office, I have also discovered that investigators are gathering piles of documents, interviews, and alleged victim contacts for possible criminal case against the alderman, even traveling to other states to track down those alleged victims. And a local Savannah attorney also gathering information and interviewing as many alleged victims as are willing to come forward for a possible civil lawsuit against Tony Thomas.